Welcome back to another edition of the Prepper Recon Podcast. Our mission is to bring you great interviews with preppers from around the world so you can be better informed and better prepared for everything from a hurricane to the end of the world as we know it. I've been purchasing gold and silver from JM Bullion since before they were a show sponsor because they have the lowest price of any dealer I know of. JM Bullion now offers free shipping on all orders. Check them out online today at jmbullion.com. Our individual first aid kits are now on sale. They're MOLLE-compatible pouches in Coyote, ACU, OD, or Black. They're equipped with an Israeli battle dressing, quick clot, TK4 tourniquet, suture kit, and lots of extras. It's perfect for your car, bug-out bag, or home first aid kit. Go to the PrepperRecon.com homepage and click on the IFAC store tab at the top of the page. They're on sale for $89, and that includes shipping. This kit could save your life. Today's guest is Hunter. Hunter took the plunge and moved out of the People's Republic of California to live among like-minded patriots in the American Redoubt. Hunter, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
Oh, absolutely. It's our pleasure. We always like to talk to people in the American Redoubt. I'm a big American Redoubt buff, even though I live way down here in Florida. But I'm hoping to make a pilgrimage up there someday soon. Now, you made the decision to uproot your family and move to the American Redoubt. Can you tell us a little bit about that decision?
Sure. First, I need to backtrack a little bit. I moved up here to northern Idaho it would be 21 years in July. So that was before there was ever an actual American Redoubt concept. As a matter of fact, it was right about the same time that John Rawls was writing his book. But my family and I knew we had to get out of California, and we've always been interested in the mountains. And we looked around. We looked in Colorado, where I learned to elk hunt. We looked in Wyoming. We looked in Georgia, but sorry, the Southeast just wasn't for us. And then we had some friends that had moved up here to Kootenai County, and a friend of the family that lived in Coeur d'Alene, and they said, well, if you're trying to get out of California, why don't you come check out North Idaho? So we did, and that was back in May of 1993. We came up here, and we got with a realtor, and this may sound strange, but the first piece of property that we looked at, my wife got out of the car and said, this is where we're supposed to be. And I said, okay, well, we have more places to look at, but okay, I'll take that under advisement. And we looked at more places, and we came back like the day before we were supposed to leave. And we got out of the rental car, and my kids were playing on a big rock on the property. And my wife says, this is where we're supposed to be. So I said, okay, well, if that's what the Lord means for us to do, he'll give us a sign, because we've, still got to sell our place back in California. So we went home, we listed our house, and 6 days later, we had an offer on it. And this was back in the economic downturn of the early 90s there. So I think that was definitely a sign. And 2 months later, in July, we were living on our property up here.
And now our long-term listeners are familiar with the American Redoubt and that concept, but for our new listeners, can you give them a brief description of where the American Redoubt is and what its purpose is?
Well, the American Redoubt, as originally conceptualized by John Wesley Rawls, is Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, and the eastern portions of Washington and Oregon. And his purpose was to have a safe haven for Judeo-Christian followers to, basically retreat to for when the world got crazy. When, if we read in the Bible, it says flee to the mountains, and I think that was one of his basis for his concept. But it's not just I'm not sure how to say it. We want like-minded people to come up here and help do a demographic shift to preserve the way of life that we've got up here. So there are, some folks that, while they are Christians and that, they don't believe in the concepts that have built this area. They like big government, and we don't need that up here. We need more people rather than government solutions.
And then we hear a lot of Christians that think that, well, you should just have faith in God and He's going to take care of you. And, even if we have an economic collapse or whatever, He's going to take care of you. Do you think that's biblical, or do you think that biblical faith actually believes that maybe God's going to judge this country because we have turned our back on Him, and maybe we need to prepare for that, and maybe there's some verses of Scripture that would actually prompt us towards that?
Well, it's kind of funny you'd mention that. I was just posting to a friend the other day that the prudent man sees trouble and takes steps to avoid it, while the simple-minded don't and suffer the consequences. And that's from Proverbs
22:3, I think.
Yeah. The Lord has given us the knowledge, the abilities, and the tools to prepare for hard times. I think that's solid principles going back to, Joseph. But I think that, just trusting the Lord isn't going to do it all the way. It's important to have trust in Him, but if you disregard His warnings, then there's going to be circumstances. And He's given us this warning over and over, that people who turn their face from me, I will, lift my hand of protection. And then, you've kind of brought it on yourself.
And you mentioned Joseph, and of course, he was able to sustain his family through the famine, through his position that was given to him providentially in Egypt. But then several generations later, and the pharaohs had pretty much forgotten about Joseph's story, and we had Moses come along, and there we see that there was the wrath of God poured out on one geographical area in Egypt, but then over just next to it in the land of Goshen, there was no hailstorms. They didn't have the frogs. They didn't have the locusts. They didn't have they didn't have the boils. They didn't have any of the plagues that they experienced in one geographical location just over. And I wonder if America did go through some type of judgment, I wonder if there would be a geographical location like the American Redoubt, or possibly even the Southern Redoubt, which is the Cumberland Plateau area, that maybe God would actually sustain His people while judgment's falling on the rest of the land.
Well, I can't presume to know the mind of God, and nobody really can. We can hope that we are being guided in that way, but maybe just that we're out of some of the way of the troubles might be a good thing. And one thing, just touching back to Joseph, I'd like to touch on. Joseph wasn't even just able to help feed Egypt and his families. Other countries were coming around to Egypt to get food and help and everything like that. So I think that's part of the biblical principle that we need to help others with our stores and our preps and everything like that when we can.
Sure thing. Now, were you in the L.A. area when the Rodney King riots were breaking out?
That was one of the major factors in the move to get out of California. It's the real kick in the butt started back in '89 when they passed the Roberti Roos assault weapons ban. But then later on, when people had been effectively removed of some of their protection weapons, except for the quote-unquote criminals, we we lived out in the desert north of Los Angeles, but I worked down in the South Bay area, down by LA International Airport, at one of the major aircraft companies. And my carpool buddy and I knew that something was going to happen when the verdict came in. It was just a 99% probability. Either there was going to be a celebration that the policeman had been convicted, or there was going to be anger that they'd been acquitted. So we took preparations to have protective measures in the vehicle with us at all times, because no one knew when the verdict was going to come down. So when it was read, it wasn't long before we started, hearing things on the news and seeing columns of smoke close to where I worked. And the company told everybody to go home and don't come back until we call you and tell you to. Well, when we were making our break for the freeway to get out of the town as soon as possible, we had a group of young, angry men approaching us at a high walking speed, and my buddy stuck a shotgun out the window, and they froze in place. Now, if we hadn't had that shotgun with us, I don't know what would have happened, but it really put, a deep respect for the Second Amendment into, I think, both groups. And so then we boogied on home. But when we got there, watching the news coverage and stuff, I was thinking to myself, this looks like some third world country. This looks like Sarajevo or Beirut. And this is not the way I want to raise my family, because I've got two beautiful young girls that, I don't want to see anything happen to. So that was one of the major motivators to get our relocation program in place.
Wow, and we saw some footage of a truck driver that didn't have a shotgun, and we saw what happened to that guy. So, praise God that you were armed and able to dissuade those people from attacking you, because that would have really been nasty. Now, do you think that was a one-time incident, or do you think that's something that we could see again in America?
Well, if we just looking at L.A., if we look back just 20 some odd years before, there was the Watts riots in 1965. We have riots for winning, football games or, basketball championships. It's becoming the nature, of, I don't want to say civilization, because it doesn't show civilization, but it's becoming a sign of the times. And when the government systems break down, the people who are totally dependent on them get angry. There was an example of that down in Florida about 2 years ago, where the EBT cards didn't function for a day, and people were storming the benefits office, demanding that they get their money to feed themselves and their children. Well, that was just a temporary glitch in the system. And if there's more than just a glitch, I really don't know what people are going to do when they don't have stores, on hand to take care of themselves, and they can't go to the local store and use their plastic card to buy something, because, I'm sorry, there's nothing on here. So, we hope for the best, but we try to prepare for the worst, too.
Yeah, it was either a glitch in the system for those EBD cards, or it was a dry run to see what type of chaos they might be dealing with if anything like that were to ever happen long term. But I guess folks on our level would never know which one.
Yeah, so if, the system went down for a longer bit of time, and, there's been studies done on how many people in a given region would be lined up, how many feet deep at Walmart trying to get in. If it's a hot day and there's no shade and very little water, people get kind of irate kind of quick. They want their turn, they want their stuff. And fights are going to break out, and who knows, what happens when our polite veneer is going to break down.
Yeah,
so,
and it's a thin one at that, I think. Now, I think that you were at a recent event where Joel Skousen spoke. There's a lot of cool events up in your neck of the woods. Now, how was that, and what did Joel speak on?
Well, that event was put on by the Spokane Tea Party Patriots, and it was the theme of the event was reclaiming sovereignty. And there was a number of good speakers, including my friend John Jacob Schmidt from Radio Free Redoubt. But Joel Skousen was the keynote speaker at the end of the day, and he spoke of primarily what he viewed as the coming inevitable nuclear war that's going to involve the superpowers in the country. Excuse me. He seems to feel that there was the warnings of an economic meltdown, the hyperinflation, some of the other threats that people view as critical right now aren't going to occur because there's the buildup of Russia and China modernizing their nuclear forces while the U.S. is doing nothing. And as a matter of fact, we are dismantling our nuclear weapons. We haven't built anything new in at least 10 years. And that President Clinton signed a presidential decision directive, PDD 60, back in the 90s that directed our military that we would not retaliate on a first strike. Otherwise, we would absorb it. And then we'd take measures from there. He feels that this strike would set in place the means for the American people to demand a militaristic, globalist response to meet the nuclear threat. And this would bring in the, I guess, quote-unquote, New World Order that has been talked about for decades now.
Oh, that's an interesting theory. Now, on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you in America's economic future?
Well, I would have to say that, everything changes. Everything shifts. You can see it stepping back to the previous reserve currency with the British sterling. That was the world reserve for, a number of years. But Britain lost its influence and it was replaced. The only thing that stays the same in history is change. And when you look at things that are happening in the modern era, like the way China and Russia are positioning themselves to not use the dollar anymore. That just came out in the news the other day. There was a new deal that was signed between them. The BRICS scenario. I don't think that our economy is quite as robust as the government and their media sycophants are trying to portray to us.
Now, similar question. On a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that our government would be able to handle an economic meltdown? And maybe at the same time, you could comment on our citizenry. How well prepared do you think the average American is to weather a storm like that?
Well, I think that, number one, the government is part of this economic repositioning. I kind of view the meltdown as like a fire, but fire needs separate components to make it work. So it has to be actively worked towards. It's not just going to happen on its own, although something could happen to make the world lose confidence in the dollar, and then it's anybody's guess as what could happen. Now, apparently, we've seen over the news that FEMA, DHS has been making huge preparations to try and put down the clamps down on any unrest. You know, they bought billions of rounds of ammunition, including sniper rounds. FEMA's trying to buy all the food they can to put away. So they know something is coming, but they're trying to keep the panic in place, in my view. That's why you don't hear as much about this stuff on CBS or NBC or CNN. You have to go to alternative media, podcasts, and other things to find out, you know, what's really going on in the world besides who just won, what was it, The Voice the other night or whatever. I think that when the change comes, and there's going to be a change coming, because you can't go, we're $17 trillion in debt right now with projections of being $24 trillion by 2020. Things can't stay the same. So there's going to have to be a shift or a reset. And they're trying to do the best they can to manage it, but who knows what's going to happen. That's in the hands of God, in my view.
Now, the government in all its various forms has a pretty bad track record of dealing with natural and man-made disasters. After Katrina, we saw house-to-house gun confiscations. 9/11 brought us the Patriot Act, and we continue to see constitutional atrocities stemming from that. We've got PRISM, the National Defense Authorization Act, indefinite detention clause. That's just naming a couple of things. What would you expect from D.C. if we had some type of economic collapse?
Well, I think there's going to be an implementation of martial law just to try to keep things in control that's consistent with other things that have happened around the world. They break out police, law enforcement, and with the militarization of law enforcement, these MRAPs and everything like that, they're going to try to shut down and control any dissent. They want to keep the panic down, like I mentioned earlier. So that would be the first stage. That would include, in my view, even more control of communications than we have now. You know, there's only going to be one side to the story, because other sides of the story bring rumors and panic and stuff like that, and that leads to more of a problem. So I can see where if the internet and cell phones weren't shut down, they would be severely monitored, content pulled, instantly, while people are trying to upload, say, videos of food shortages at, Walmart with empty shelves and stuff, because that would encourage, people to run down there and get what they could while they can. So, I think communications is going to be the linchpin, and why we need to do other things to develop alternative means of communication so that we can find out what the truth is and respond effectively, rather than to just the propaganda that we're going to get of, oh, don't worry, everything's fine.
And you're a member of AMRON, right, which is an alternative communications network in the American Redoubt. Can you tell us just a little bit about that?
Sure. First thing, I'd like to mention how I found out about it. I volunteered with the North Idaho Medical Reserve Corps last year, and the first thing that we did is we had a solar storm formidable footprint exercise, where all communications were knocked out as a result of the storm. Well, one of the concepts that we have in the MRC is that nobody self-deploys. You wait for a call-up and you're told where to go, when to be there. Well, now our foundation was kicked out, and we were saying, okay, if we're supposed to shelter at home until we're called up, how are we going to get contacted? One of the guys that was in that exercise, he says, well, duh, ham radio. And we all looked at him and said, huh? That's too hard. You got to know Morse code. It's too expensive. We had all these. And he says, no, You can get your technician's license. You don't need to know Morse code anymore. It's, you know, a 30-something question test. And go home and Google this thing called a Bofang UV5. So I did, and I went, whoa, this is like a two-way ham radio for $40 plus the charger and everything. And I investigated what, you know, he was saying about the ham technician's class license, and it was true. So I bought the radio, and a little bit after that, Oath Keepers put on a Patriot and Self-Reliance rally at a state park that's not too far from me. So I went down there, and Amron had a booth down there, and I asked them if they could help me program this Chinese radio that the instructions weren't too good on, and the guy says, yes, I can help you. And so he did, and we started talking, and he said, you know, you need to, you know, check out some of these things that are going on. So I did, and it gradually just kind of snowballed, and I wanted to, you know, learn more about the radio, learn how to use it, and then these guys, I'm not sure if your listeners are familiar with the ham radio term called Elmers, that are the experienced people that bring along the new people. And they say, this, you know, is what we've tried, this is what, you know, works in our area, and, you know, we encourage you to work in this direction, and then try this, and then try, you know, option C. So I did, and it's turned out to be a huge resource, and I greatly encourage people who are interested in developing communications, not just with ham, but with CB, with FRS, and everything like that, to check out the Amron site and hopefully become members of it.
Very cool. Now, Hunter, what else are you doing right now to continue in your prepping?
Well, we continue to try and add to food stores and stuff like that as we can when we find something on sale, you know, at the local stores. You know, if there's twofers, you know, obviously get those. We try to copy can as much as possible. But the one thing that we're really trying to do is we're trying to get healthy or healthier, and we're trying to take care of medical needs that we may have before something happens. Like, for example, my wife had a bad knee that she was told she was going to have it replaced eventually. Well, with, you know, versions of or parts of Obamacare coming on, and who knows what's going to happen in the future, she might not be able to get that knee 2 years, 3 years, 5 years down the line. So we took and got that medical procedure done now while we can, while we had insurance, to, you know, address that situation. We try to, well, you know, you folks advertise fish antibiotics and stuff like that, and that's a wonderful thing to have. I view that as like the insurance policy. I think it's better to get healthy and stay healthy if possible, be like a defensive driver, so you don't need the insurance. And I think that's what one thing we really need to strive for is get healthier now to prevent needing some of these modern pharmaceutical drugs and stuff like that could be in short supply if a economic problem ever happened.
Absolutely. I think that's really, really great advice. I think that was really smart, getting your wife's knee taken care of. I always encourage people to go to the dentist, get your teeth taken care of, get those fillings filled. If you got a bad one, get it, pull it, whatever you got to do, especially your teeth, because you know it's a bad day when you have a toothache or a bad cavity, and if it's the end of the world as we know it, and you've got a toothache, it's just going to make a miserable situation that much worse. And being in shape, because it's going to take a lot of extra effort. There's going to be extra chores that you don't do on a normal day-to-day basis right now that you're going to have to handle in a grid down situation, or even I live in South Florida. After Hurricane Wilma, we were out slinging chainsaws around and clearing driveways and clearing roads and cutting up down trees. And you got to be in shape for that kind of stuff. And if not, you could be looking at a heart attack, and you're going into an already overloaded medical system that's already operating beyond their surge capacity. And so it's always better to be healthy, and you're always naturally more immune to other diseases when you're in good physical shape and eating healthy and all of that. That's great advice. Hunter, thanks again for taking time to come on the show today and sharing your experience.
Well, thank you so much for having me on there. If I could mention one more thing, if folks are interested in moving to Redoubt or Freer America, I'm also involved in a forum called Walking to Freedom, walkingtofreedom.com, and there's a whole different sections on each state where you can talk to people in the area that you're thinking about moving to, not necessarily the American Redoubt or Idaho in particular, but all the states. Or if you're trying to stay in one of the more oppressive ones and you need help, you want to network and stuff like that there. I think it's a great resource, and I definitely encourage your listeners to check out that website as well.
Well, we'll put links in today's show notes for that. But for the folks listening on Stitcher, iTunes, and YouTube, can you just give them that web address one more time?
It's www.walking to the letter T or the word T-O, freedom.com, all lowercase.
Hunter, thanks again.
It was a pleasure, my friend, and hope to speak to you more soon.
Hey Preppers and Patriots, American Meltdown, the long-awaited sequel to American Exit Strategy, is now available in Kindle and paperback. In American Meltdown, Book 2 of the Economic Collapse Chronicles, the new president, Anthony Howe, signs an executive order banning all semi-automatic weapons. Matt, Adam, and Wesley Baer begin training with their local militia for the battle that is coming. Within weeks of the inauguration, the $700 trillion derivatives bubble pops when rates on U.S. debt skyrocket. The derivatives crisis is the final nail in the coffin of the banking system and the death of the fiat currency system in America. With the dollar gone, commerce comes to a screeching halt. While times prove to be tough for all, survival favors the prepared. Get your Kindle or paperback copy of American Meltdown, Book 2 of the Economic Collapse Chronicles on Amazon today.